Good morning and welcome to this Sunday's hybrid service with the Unitarian Universalist Meeting House of Chatham. My name is Bonnie Bridges and I am the service leader today. Helping with the service is Gary Senecal, a sustainable practice representative from Eastham. We are so pleased to have you join us. If you are a visitor, we extend a special welcome to you and are happy you decided to join us this morning. Is there anyone who would like to introduce themselves and tell us where you are from? If so, please raise your hand, and those of you on Zoom can unmute yourself when we call on you.
I'm Susanna Nickerson from Chatham. I usually attend the Methodist Church, but today my friend Madhavi, and I see Gary as well, will be participating, so I came here.
Welcome. You. Anybody? Sorry.
No. Get the microphone closer.
Okay, sorry. Sounds really loud. Okay, good. And there's no one on Zoom. I didn't see any hands on Zoom, right? Okay. Our service this morning is led by Madhavi Venkatesan from Sustainable Practices. She earned her BA, MA, and PhD in economics from Vanderbilt University and a master's in environmental law and policy from Vermont Law School. She is currently a full-time faculty member in the economics department at Northeastern University. Dr. Venkatesan is the founder and executive director of Sustainable Practices, a nonprofit whose mission is to facilitate a culture of sustainability by reducing the human-made impact to the planet and its ecological systems. Sustainable Practices is currently working on banning single-use plastic water bottles in each Cape Cod town. Following our service today, we will have a short Q&A session, followed by breakout rooms for those of you on Zoom. Those attending in person, we invite you to join us for conversation on the porch. Please raise your hands for any announcements, and know those on Zoom will be called on also. A reminder to unmute when called upon. We will have time for joys and concerns later in the service. Are there any announcements?
Okay, I have a couple, Bonnie.
Sue?
I have two. One is tomorrow night is the women's gathering out at Osprey Point. Yes, sir. Tomorrow night is the women's gathering at Osprey Point. If you are interested, it's at 5 o'clock. We bring a bag supper, if you will, and a chair, and we just sit there at 5 o'clock for an hour or an hour and a half, just chatting and enjoying the beautiful view. You are more than welcome to attend. If you did not get an email from me, you can talk to me after the service or give me a call, Sue Bauer, and I will give you the directions because Osprey Point is something we named it. You're not going to find it on a map. And from Mary Parsons, we had a good week this week at the thrift shop, earning $2,380, which brings the total for the season to over $31,000, which is awesome. So thank you from her.
Wonderful.
I live at 606 Main Street in Chatham, and right out front there's a little display case. I give away milkweed seed to help the monarch butterfly. So I see some heads going up and down. People know about this. But if anyone would like seeds, there's a jar out there. I try to make it 24 hours so people can just go and pick them up and plant them. Thank you.
Wonderful. This is a reminder that our community outreach for the month of July, this will be our last Sunday, is Chatham Children's Fund. Now is the time for our chalice lighting. Gary will be lighting the chalice, and I will be reading from Chief Seattle. This we know, the earth does not belong to us. We belong to the earth. This we know, All things are connected like the blood which unites one family. Our opening hymn is number 38 in the hymnal, Morning Has Broken. Please rise in body or in spirit and remain standing for the affirmation and doxology. Morning has broken like the first morning. Blackbird has spoken like the first bird. Praise for the singing, praise for the morning, praise for them spring. Fresh from the word, sweet the rain's roof, sunlit from heaven, like the first dew fall on the first grass. Praise for the sweetness of the wet garden, spring in completeness, where God's feet pass. Please join us at home from Muted for our affirmation. Love is the spirit of this meeting house, and service is its foundation. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. Below the sky, let songs of hope and faith arise. Let peace, goodwill on earth be sung through every land by every tongue. This is the time in our service where we have the opportunity to share our joys and concern with one another. If there is a joy you wish to celebrate with this community, or if there is a concern you need the help of this congregation to hold, I invite you to raise your hand and we will bring you the microphone. Is there anyone at home who has a joy or concern?
Hi, folks. Can you hear us?
Yeah. Yes.
I have a joy that Naomi and I look like a two-headed monster today here at church. We're just glad to be here and sending lots of love to everyone.
Right.
You didn't have any joys, Nate?
Yeah, I have a joy that my friend Dean is here. So happy to see her.
Thank you, Dana and Naomi. Now is the time for meditation and prayer. The reading today will be from Edward Everett Hale. I am only one, but I am still one. I cannot do everything, but I can do something. And because I cannot do everything, I will not refuse to do the something that I can do. Let's take a moment in silence to reflect on these things. Amen. Please remain seated and join in singing Spirit of Life, number 123. Spirit of life, come unto me, sing in my heart all the joy of compassion. Blow in the wind, blow in the sea, you in my life, all the fears of justice. Set me free, Spirit of life, come to me, come to me. Gary is going to read a selection called The Butterfly Effect by Dana Capasso. Gary?
The Butterfly Effect, Dana Capasso. The delicate flapping wings of the butterfly have the power to set molecules of air in motion, in turn moving more molecules of air. A tiny act that is eventually capable of affecting weather patterns on the other side of the planet. This notion comes from a concept within the chaos theory called the butterfly effect. Simply, the butterfly refers to a phenomenon in our world in which a small change in one place can result in equal or greater changes elsewhere. This may seem crazy. A tiny butterfly changing global weather patterns? Not only is the butterfly effect a real scientific theory, but it is also an intriguing philosophical idea. I say all this because the butterfly effect affects the way I live my life. I'm no meteorologist, nor am I well-versed in etymology. But ever since learning about the butterfly effect, I've been attracted to it because it demonstrates an important principle that is often forgotten. Namely, each of our actions has effects that are more profound than we think. Interconnection is a major theme found in nearly all the world's religions and philosophical traditions. The interconnectedness of our universe is also one of the most significant revelations of physics. All components of matter are interconnected, interrelated, interdependent. As Unitarian Universalists, we affirm and promote our responsibility to remain aware of interconnection through our seventh principle, respect for the independent web of existence. Attention to interconnectivity reminds me, despite the many socio-political forces that work to divide us from one another, that I'm never alone in this world. It reminds me that each decision or action I make has reactions, and those reactions reverberate as waves moving back and forth across our globe. This compels me to live my life aware of the consequences of my daily actions, from the purchases I make to personal interactions with others. I certainly do not always succeed, but I always try. My awareness of interconnectivity and efforts to work against the illusion of division remains my most significant spiritual practice. This spiritual practice also gives me the ability to stand in awe of interconnection, in awe of the butterfly effect and the power that comes with it. On rare occasions, I am reminded to stop and appreciate the divinity of interconnectivity, revealed before my very eyes. This, to me, is awe-inspiring. This, to me, is divine. Thank you. Excuse me.
Thank you, Gary. We'd like to welcome Madhavi Venkatesan.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining. A few of us here from Sustainable Practices, I'd really like to thank Bonnie Bridges for organizing today's events. I have two other people that I want to recognize. Susanna has already noted herself, but Susanna is a representative for Chatham for Sustainable Practices. Gary is a representative for Eastham for Sustainable Practices, and Bonnie for Harwich. The picture that was up was of us in 2019 when we first started our petition program based on citizens' petitions across the Cape. All 15 towns have a municipal plastic bottle ban in effect as of last year. This is due to the work of this group, but we also instituted a commercial single-use plastic water bottle ban last year. We passed in 11 towns. Unfortunately, we had 3 rescind, but we're pushing forward. But they've been in effect now, the 8 that are in effect, for over a year. So we're very happy and proud of that, and we're continuing to move forward. But my discussion with you today is actually going to be related to this, related to some of what Gary just noted too in terms of our interconnectivity, but also hopefully relating that all to economics in a way that may be novel for you. But first, let me just point out, I too started at the Unitarian Universalist Church. I live in Brewster, and I was privileged when I joined the church to have Reverend J.D. and Mary be our ministers at that church. And I remember one particular sermon that they made a point, and they said, by the time you leave, within probably a few hours, you may be remembering maybe 10% of what was said. I'm hoping that I leave you with at least that 10% today. Because I'm going to be speaking to you with regard to my passion and what I've decided that I'm going to focus on in my life because I am compelled to do so. And that is what I think what you find when you finally find your calling. So first of all, as was noted, I am an economist. But most people neglect to understand, because they haven't been taught this, that economics is a moral philosophical discipline. It is a social science based on human behavior. It has become, unfortunately, quantified, so people automatically, when they think that I'm an economist, ask me what the financial markets are going to do. But it really has very little to do with the financial markets, and more to do with the concept of well-being. It does tell us quite a bit how we've skewed our societies over the last 80 years to be more focused on the outcome of our work rather than the purpose of it. So first, I'd like to just start off by just mentioning a couple things related to Adam Smith, which I'm sure all of you have heard of. Adam Smith wrote 2 books. The first one was called The Theory of Moral Sentiments, and the second, The Wealth of Nations. The one that most people quote, though most people have not read, is The Wealth of Nations, and this is where the concept of laissez-faire economics and the invisible hand comes from. But not knowing the context of what he's writing, it may miss the point that most of what he's saying is that there is an inherent component in all of us, conscience. And it is our conscience, or the hand of God, because Adam Smith was a deist, that guides us in the invisible hand to do what is in the best interests of our society, not our individual best interests. Milton Friedman in the 1970s took Adam Smith out of context. And that is, unfortunately, the context that most people think of. They think that people, by individually looking out for their own self-interest, will benefit the whole. I want to give you room to think about this for a second. When, unless somebody's individual self-interest is connected to somebody else's, does it benefit the whole? So you have to have some understanding of the interconnection between you to be able to be benefiting others by looking out for your own individual interests. And in a society that's increasingly individually focused, it's almost impossible. So what we really have set ourselves up by misinterpreting that phrase or what he was trying to say is to legitimize individual desires, gratifications, without any responsibility to others. So this is where the whole concept of grassroots movements that I want to share with you today comes from as well. Because why do grassroots movements start? They don't start because only a couple people look at society and say there needs to be change. They start because a couple of people are so compelled to make that change that they sacrifice the time for their individual selves to look out for the collective good. And that's really an important point to think about, because each one of us has a certain amount of time that we could take and put aside to doing things that would be for the collective good. But in a society that actually rewards you only for doing for what you want for yourself, it makes it very difficult to justify in a rational term why you should give up to do something that you may not benefit directly from. And this is another point, because it really boils down to the socialized values, the norms that you've accepted and adopted. What we've seen in all of us in here, fortunately or unfortunately, are enough of an age to know that there has been several changes that have occurred over the last 50 years, I'm going to put it there. One of the ones that I recognize the most is something that came about in the 1979 State of the Union speech by Jimmy Carter, sometimes referred to as the Culture of Malaise speech, in which he was talking specifically about our energy crisis, but also brought up the fact that we have become a country full of people who are looking out for their own individual gratification. That the feeling that we used to get from being friends and neighbors and members of our own families was starting to deteriorate. Jimmy Carter was speaking in 1979. Approximately around 1942, the global economic indicator of progress was the gross national product. It was adopted on an international basis. The gross national product requires us to look at growth, economic betterment, principally based on how much we produce. Those production costs only contain the monetized elements of production. Waste has never been monetized. It's what we call an externality. Extraction has never been monetized. Exploitation has never been monetized, because those are all elements that happen to the vulnerable. So in the focus only of a metric that measures market value, you omit so many other values that interconnect us in terms of our well-being to one another. But it also shares one other factor, which is a growing amount of consumerism. In order to grow an economy like the United States, a non-command and control system, you need to grow consumption. So when he was speaking in 1979, we're about 37 years off of that indicator being adopted, legitimized on a global basis, but already inherent part of the American culture. What he's also seeing is a cultural transformation to consumerism. This idea of individual self-gratification being more and more important and being the indicator of our well-being based on what other people perceive of us based on what we have. What happened during this time period is that we moved from qualitative attributes of what make us feel fulfilled to quantitative measures of it. You can't measure love. You can't measure how important a smile is to you on a day where you're feeling bad, but you can measure the income you make. So how much I make then becomes the barometer of how successful I am. And you can see this as it's happened over the last several decades. How many things have been normalized which should bring us compassion towards one another, but have actually limited it? And that's because we're focused more on the outward manifestation, because that's what our economy actually supports, than the internal well-being where we actually live. So one other example I'll bring up It's this whole idea. I often ask my students, are we inherently competitive or cooperative? So can I ask you, are we inherently competitive or cooperative? How many people would say we are inherently competitive? How many of you would say we're inherently cooperative? We are inherently cooperative. How many of you would say we were inherently aggressive? Inherently passive? I am in a UU church, so I am unfortunately speaking to my choir. But when you go out into the world, majority of people would say we are inherently competitive because that is the world that they are in. And they would also say that we're naturally aggressive. But the two things about this that are interesting is aggression stomps out passivity. So even if you had a cooperative society, by its very nature, you'd only need one or two people to be aggressive for that to be taken out of the picture in terms of what you visibly see, unless that society had a way of handling it. It's sort of like a concept of oligopoly in economics. You can either have everyone working together and you collude, or you have one person who decides to maximize their profits, and then they create perfect competition. In our society, the other aspect of that is, why do we digress so quickly from cooperative to perfect competition? One could argue it's because inherent in all of us is a sense of fear of who's going to look out for us if we don't look out for ourselves. So the reason why I bring up these elements here is, first, we have a moral philosophical discipline that's been misinterpreted to justify competition and wealth creation and outward manifestations of well-being rather than internal ones. And then we've legitimized this particular type of model based on the fact that people are so focused on saying that this is the income I'm making, therefore I must be successful. This is the car that I'm driving, so therefore I am somebody. We look for these outward manifestations because there's no requirement for them. No one's able to tell how you made your money. 50 years ago, that was sort of important, wasn't it? How you made your money was more important than having it. Today, having it is more important than the manner in which you made it. And when you look at it from that perspective, vice will always be more financially rewarding than virtue. This is an inherent disconnect when we look at the spiritual practice of economics from the moral philosophical roots. This is an area where I don't have an answer. But during Adam Smith's time, when you had small localized systems that understood their interconnectivity, it was what he was talking about in terms of looking out for the individual. It is my desire to be loved by you that makes me want to make sure whatever product I sell you will draw you back to me. Does that make sense? Multinational corporations don't have to think that way. Because whether they get you or they get someone else, it's in an anonymous situation. So when we're looking at it from that perspective, my wealth becomes an indication of my virtue. Today, my wealth has nothing to do with my virtue. In fact, I might be working for a company not even understanding that my very company is helping exacerbate the social justice and environmental justice issues that I'm fighting for in terms of protecting the environment and protecting vulnerable peoples on my time off. So this is an important aspect. And just add one little thing here before I go and connect it to the grassroots movements. It's also the one aspect that keeps us from doing what we think we should do. So it creates what we would call cognitive dissonance. So I need my job because I live in an economy that cannot allow me to survive any other way. I can't grow my food, make my own energy, and get my own water. It's very difficult. In fact, those are almost luxuries to be able to do that for yourself today, which is a little odd when you really think about it. So I need my job to the extent that sometimes I may have to make a trade-off between my actual values and beliefs in order to be able to maintain the income I need to take care of my family. And I think that is probably true for 90% of our population. Because when you look at it, all the issues that we're dealing with in the world today are not something that are coming from the outside in. They're coming from the inside out. And our entrenchment in the economic system is one of the primary reasons why we can't stop. Because in order to stop, we have to individually say we won't participate, which, going back to the first comment I made, one of the biggest challenges and the reason why grassroots are so small is because it's hard to justify in the individual level unless you're compelled. Why should I make a sacrifice when my neighbor isn't, for a greater good that I may not be the beneficiary for? And that is a society that we have lived in the last several decades. It is a society that's continued and continues to thrive, a polarized society where we don't talk to each other when we have differing opinions. We just talk at each other as to who is right or wrong. We need to be very cautious of this, because in order to solve the problems that we have currently, which are not too challenging to do, we have to be able to engage with one another. So this is where grassroots movements come in. And one other aspect that I'd hope to bring up with you is, unfortunately, we always credit the leaders of these movements for what they accomplished. But there are really no leaders. So everyone, I hate to make this analogy, but it's probably the easiest one to make. Everyone is chopping down at a tree, trying to remove this obstacle to improve the landscape, let's say. Just because one person finally hits at a point that causes it to tip over doesn't mean that they were the only one instrumental in that process. In fact, thinking in those terms polarizes the change, because now you've created a hierarchy in the change itself, which you already told me were naturally collective. You actually, by assuming and crediting only one person, you made it almost competitive. Does that make sense? And I think in many ways that's why we see a dissolution of movements right when they're getting started. Because instead of rewarding the whole, you're rewarding one. You've already broken it down. So grassroots movements we know have been around forever. And people, I want to point out one thing that comes up in our organization quite a bit, which is this idea that, well, I don't want to see us having to make these local changes. Why do we need to do the changes here? We need to wait until the government steps in and they can ban on the state level or on the national level. Okay. There are three silos in our economy: individuals, consumers, I'll call them consumers, investors, and then the government. And we happen to be each one. You are consumers. You have probably invested some money through a 401k, 403b, maybe you have an investment portfolio, whatever. You have some money, more than likely, in some sort of savings account. And then you are a citizen, or at least in some way, shape, or form have some constructive element to influence your local government. Local government is a mirror of the society that it governs. And people, unfortunately, have a desire to be reelected. So by saying that the government is going to somehow be progressive beyond the individual that it governs means that you're not really connecting the dots. It won't be any more progressive than the electorate demands of it. So the government isn't going to be stepping in and banning anything until it's already too late, or the damage has been done quite a bit. That's why individual action on the local level on a grassroots basis matters. The other thing that people say to us is, well, corporations, they should be held accountable. Well, if you're investors, aren't you making money from your investments for those corporations? So in a way, you're actually helping their cause of not wanting to deal with the issues that they're creating. You can't say on one hand the corporation is held responsible and on the other hand demand that it makes returns, because those returns are being made on the very externalities that are affecting your health and the well-being of the planet. And the other thing that people say, well, the consumer shouldn't be held responsible, but do you want cheap prices for the goods that you buy? Of course you do. The moment somebody starts talking about organic, the first comments we hear are, oh, it's so much more expensive. It's not more expensive at all. It's just that when you buy organic, You're buying something that's pricing in the externalities to other people. Since it's not using fertilizer that's going to adversely impact groundwater, and it's not using other types of chemicals that are going to affect other insect life and other creatures that we are dependent upon but are too ignorant to understand our dependence on, we are not pricing that damage into that commercial apple, but that is priced in to the organic one. Because the lack of using those items make it cost just a little bit more to make. The same thing goes with anything else that's sustainable. It's not that the prices are higher, it's that the externalized costs are not externalized anymore. They are internalized. You're paying a wage that ensures a family can eat. You're paying so that the pollution doesn't go into the water. You're recognizing that the damage done by your consumption needs to be incorporated within the price so you don't overconsume. When we talk about plastic bottles, specifically, this is very easy. We extract petroleum. Most people are not necessarily aware that plastic, even the masks that we are wearing, have plastic in them. It's an unfortunate aspect of COVID that we dropped all of the steps forward that we were making on single use. But you're using a petroleum-based product that contributes to greenhouse gas emissions. You're consuming this product, which we know upon heating will leach into whatever container, whatever food substance, water, whatever it is that you're drinking, eating, if it's heated, and affect your health. It's directly tied to endocrine disruption, ADHD, obesity, cardiovascular disease, fertility issues. It has synthetic estrogen, so it affects men perhaps maybe even more than women. And think about the amount of plastic we consume out of. Then at disposal, since it is not biodegradable, it will live literally forever. I don't know how many of you drive around a lot, but I would, even on the Cape, if you're not focusing forward, if you have a moment just to look on the sides, you'll see how much plastic there exists. I drive to Boston and back every weekend, and it's amazing how much plastic is everywhere. And it's now caught in wires and things like this that you'll see in underpasses. And it's amazing because it's killing our birds, it's killing our wildlife. And that's another discussion that unfortunately I won't be having with you today. But the reality is, why did we produce this? Good, because it's cheap. We used costs rather than well-being as the indicator of its production, its use, and its ubiquitous nature now. It goes back to what I said earlier. The focus only on the quantitative elements have let the qualitative attributes actually fall very far behind. So let me finally say with regard to this, with regard to banning, the reason why we ban, and I know that the summary of my talk said that I was going to discuss this from slavery to the current SCOTUS outcome. The reason why we ban is because when you eliminate the choice, you force the change. That's why slavery was banned. It didn't have a successive, slow start to, we'll do a little bit here, a little bit there. It was just outright ban. Same thing with what we're doing with our grassroots movements, an outright ban. The issue, though, becomes that if people don't understand the reason why things are being banned, they circumvent the regulation to meet the needs that they have, the desires that they have. So though slavery was banned, we needed a Civil Rights Act in 1964 because majority of people were not really caught up with the idea of human equality. We are banning plastic water bottles. They have people coming out with cartons that are lined in plastic and wanting other types of substitutes rather than using reusables because they're trying to maintain their consumption patterns as opposed to understanding that we're asking for behavioral change. So again, there's that education component. The elimination of abortion capabilities in terms of a federal law to protect it, it doesn't ban abortion. What it does make us recognize perhaps more is the vigilance that we should have always had at the local level. Because the power that the states have reflects the local perceptions even more than the federal ones, right? So what you're off, what the issue here also, I think, and I don't want to be too political with you, but just as an example here, with regard to same-sex marriage, there's a less likelihood that there's going to be an opposition to it at the Supreme Court level. And why is that? It's because on a social level, it has become more universally accepted. 70% of the American public are in acceptance of same-sex marriage. The issue we have to take away is the lack of education on abortion and what it means has probably not allowed for that same percentage, but it also is indicative of a gender bias. And we have a very strong gender bias. We have always had a strong gender bias. We don't have to go too far until the 1970s. We can see where women actually had some financial equal rights. So perhaps maybe it's a wake-up call because we haven't been so vigilant with regard to protecting those rights that now we have this opportunity to do so. It also tells us that the traction for women's rights was not as universal as the deeming of them. So this is another learning opportunity for us. But just to go back to what we're trying to do on the Cape, and hopefully a takeaway for you, is grassroots works, but only works if we can get people to listen, and if we can find a way to channel our communications in ways that we can connect with people that we wouldn't normally come into contact with. I'm feeling that I would come into contact with all of you at many different venues, more than likely. But it's the challenge of those others that I wouldn't that matters even more. Because it's only when I have the point where everybody understands in relation to what incentivizes them to make a change that positively affects the whole that we can actually get traction on that change. So the interesting part is that 8 towns that have adopted the commercial single-use plastic water bottle ban, their personalities, because I've gone to every single town meeting, are very different from the ones that have really opposed it. We've had hour and 15 minutes, hour and 30 minutes of discussion and debate on town meeting floor. And it really tells us a lot about the importance and significance of demographics and how people, different groups, have come into information in their lifetime, and how fear or individualism has affected some groups as opposed to others. Affluence naturally allows for collectivism. Avarice does not. And this is really important for us to think about, because perhaps the greatest challenge we have and the greatest opportunity we have is in eliminating the socioeconomic differences that impede people's ability to really see what's in the betterment of all, because they're so focused on the maintenance of their own existence. So at the very root is almost a sustainable development goal number 1, which is in effect right now, which is no poverty. I will leave with that because I know I've probably exceeded my time with you, but I hope that there's maybe 10% of something I said that may be of use value to you. I love being an economist, but I think I have undersold philosophy. I think most of us should probably read a little bit more on that too. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Madhavi. You've left us with a lot of things to think about. We've come to the time when we ask for your contribution to help sustain and grow our meeting house. Whether you are in our beautiful building or with us online on Zoom, our ongoing fellowship and organization continues, and we appreciate your support. As we pass the basket for our offering, please remember that there is also a separate basket at the back of the meeting house where you can contribute to our monthly community outreach, which is the Chatham Children's Fund. This is a good time to get that contribution ready to be placed in the basket as you leave. We also have a donate button on our website for several different types of offerings, and of course you can also mail a check to the meeting house. The address is on the screen. Whichever you choose and however it arrives, we are grateful for your generosity. And now let there be an offering to strengthen and sustain this space, this community of memory and of hope, for we are the keepers of the dream. Our closing words will be read by Gary from Dorothy Day.
By Dorothy Day. People say, what is the sense of our small effort? They cannot see that we must lay one brick at a time, take one step at a time. A pebble cast into a pond causes ripples that spread in all directions. Each one of our thoughts, words, and deeds is very much like that. No one has a right to sit down and feel hopeless. There's too much work to do. Thank you.
Our closing hymn is number 16, "'Tis a Gift." Please rise as you are able and join in singing. "'Tis a gift to be simple, 'tis a gift to be free, 'tis a gift to come down where we ought to be. And when we find ourselves in the place just right, to be in the valley of love and delight. When true simplicity is gained, we shall be ashamed. Turn will be our delight. Will come out right. You may be seated. We will now extinguish this chalice. We extinguish, and please read along. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Thank you, Priscilla. As we go forth from this sacred space, may we celebrate the earth and our shared lives. May we recognize our connections to all that is in and on earth. May we truly and deeply value the inherent worth of all in this awesome, interconnected web of existence. May we commit ourselves to a new way, and may we hold our commitments and each other gently and firmly. Blessed be. Now, are there any questions that you would like to ask Madhavi? Does anyone have anything they'd like to ask her, either on Zoom or in person?
Hello, it's me, Dana, again.
Yes,
I
Dana.
have, my question is, I would love to know how to find that wonderful speaker and get involved.
Madhavi?
I'm so sorry. Could you repeat the question?
I'd love to know how to find you and get more involved in everything you were talking about. It was fabulous.
We are a local nonprofit based on Cape Cod. You can look us up at sustainablepracticesltd.org. We actually have a radio show that's also podcast. It airs on WOMR the fourth Monday of every month at 12:30. And we have a documentary film series, which is going to be in its 6th year, starting this fall. We go from September to June at the Chatham Orpheum Theater. It has been our principal means of making money. It has been our principal means of losing money for the last 2 years because of COVID, but we've kept it going nonetheless. We will start off, the September film is a film called The Box Truck Film. It was by Alex Eves. He'll be bringing his box truck. It'll be parked in front of the Orpheum that weekend, well, that day, which is September 3rd. It's a U-Haul truck that they basically completely refabbed and made into a tiny home on wheels. He doesn't live in it all the time, but he takes it whenever he goes places. It even has a bathroom. And the film is really about the whole tiny home movement. Other films that we show are related to social justice and environmental justice. They are at an odd time. They are at 9:30 in the morning, the first Saturday of every month. But we really hope that some of you will come. All of those films are located on our website, so are our previous seasons of the podcast series, and those continue on. We just spoke to a young woman who has roots on the Cape. The company is called Useful, and Martha's Vineyard, if I'm not mistaken, has already adopted a model very similar to this. Instead of having single-use paper and plastic cups, they actually have a distribution of stainless steel that are then rented. Basically, when you go to a restaurant, you take your takeout or your coffee, and then you can have it dropped off at a convenient location. It's picked up and then sent back through the system, which would be a really great way of reducing our disposal costs. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Susanna?
Well, similar. I was just going to say, in each community is different. The way they have voted on different things that we push forward. But again, what can we do? I know in my life, reducing plastic is the #1 concern. In every single thing I do, I always consider, is it plastic or not? When I go shopping, every item I look at how much plastic. And I had, I don't know if someone gave this to me or not, but the idea of, just imagine if every single plastic item, because plastic is not biodegradable, it's going to be on the planet forever. So in your mind, think of each item that you will have to hang on to if you collected every plastic item that you used in your life. Because that plastic item is going to be on the planet forever. So if you, when you shop and purchase things, if you think of
May I add one thing to what Susanna has brought up? For those of you, one of the aspects of this whole plastic issue that we're hearing is a pushback from the industry itself, bottling industry. They keep on talking about recyclability. Single-use plastic water bottles or single-use plastic in many forms can never be recycled into its own product again. So when it's being recycled, it's being downcycled. That's why if you've noticed, almost everything you have has spandex or elastin in it. Those are all plastic. So more and more, all this recycled plastic is getting into the clothing fibers, and that's how it's entering into our water systems, because when it's washed, it gets into our water system and it can't be taken out. That's one of the major contamination issues there, right there. And you need to really focus on that. The films that we show actually highlight some of these things, and so some of you may find that interesting. If you check out our website and just look and see what types of films are coming up in the season, maybe you might find it useful. But the other aspect is in using it in construction materials, because it will break off there too, and it becomes microplastic. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to jump in. Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, even these masks, I have cloth masks in my purse, and I'm so sorry to have used this, but I will reuse it because it's only me. But the one thing we don't think about is recently there's some reports that have come out about the increased amount of plastic found in human lung tissue. Well, these were not meant to be worn all the time. More than likely, we're breathing in those particles, I would imagine, and that's why it's happening. Unfortunately, one other thing just to take into consideration here is usually there's a paucity of research in areas that are going to be detrimental to the income stream of some entity. So we often rely on research as a means of determining whether or not we should or shouldn't be cautious about something. But if there's so much money to be made in the manufacture of it, the research with regard to the negation of it isn't probably going to be out there, because who's going to fund it? It goes back to that whole idea of grassroots. You're going to have people who are willing to go out and fund those types of research studies on their own. And all they're going to get is a lot of negative pushback from the industry that has a lot more money, right? So please take that into consideration as well. But the research is starting to show that there are a lot of adverse consequences that we have not taken into consideration. So thank you.
Thank you, Madhavi. Anyone on Zoom? Okay, thank you very much, and we'd like to have you join us if you feel like it for conversations on the porch. And those of you on Zoom, you will be assigned to a breakout room if you choose that. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Madhavi and Gary.
Thank you. I took a picture of you, Gary.
Thanks,
We'll put it on our website. We haven't had any pictures.
And Priscilla, thank you.
Maybe we can get a group picture. You, me, Bonnie, and Susanna. What do you think? I'll ask Susanna.
Well, thank you. Kind of long, but not that long, actually. Yeah, all right. Thanks, Sue.